Let's kick off. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to AFP's first webinar. I'm delighted to introduce myself, Julie Semerol, an AFP Director, and I'm your host for today. My colleagues joining me are James Pestle, who's also an AFP Director, Paul Hollick, our AFP Chair, and Stuart Lightbody, AFP Deputy Chair. And our guest today is Paul Brown, who is the International Fleet Manager for Stereoscience. Just a bit of housekeeping before we begin the presentations. I need to advise you that we'll be recording the webinar to allow members to review the content. We'll be doing that, obviously we want them to be able to do that at a later stage. We've decided to hold questions until the end, but feel free to ask any questions through the chat functionality as the presentations, we go through the presentations. Okay, I'd like to hand over to Paul Hollick now, who will provide an introduction to the organisation, our organisation, AFP.
Good morning, everybody. James, can you just pass the slides on a few? Next one, please. So good morning, everybody. I hope you're all well and safe. So I just wanted to spend 5-10 minutes just going through the new AFP organisation as we bring, well, as we have brought the ICFM and ACFO together under one umbrella, which is the Association of Fleet Professionals. So in terms of the organisation structure, all board directors that were previously at ACFO and ICFM are now board directors of the Association of Fleet Professionals. It's led by myself and Stuart Lightbody as deputy. With Peter Aldridge, Rick Baird, James Pestle, Debbie Floyd, Julie Semerol, who you've just met, David Brown, Denise Lane, Martin Evans, Peter Milchard, Marie Jarrold and Chris Joyce. Obviously, as part of the organisation and the processes, we've now merged the support teams together, so there's one central hub in terms of admin led by Lynn Aldridge. Our training manager is Steve Hook, PR is done by Simon Wells. Legal is done by Lizzie Parkinson, finance by Amanda Lachlan-Pack, and IT and tech by Julian Croft. So we've got a robust structure in place now, which we can build on for the future. Obviously, as we bring the two organisations together, the ICFM is still focused on and still branded as the ICFM as our Fleet Academy, and is concentrating on education and training, developing training courses, recruiting the best calibre trainers, driving delegate numbers, delivery of management courses and personal development of our members as well. While the ACFO brand has now ceased to exist, it's now just the Association of Fleet Professionals. And the other side of our coin is the lobbying and policy setting, which is now being run by the board and also the committees that we've set up. We went to press to say that there were 7 committees, but in fact we decided to rationalise them to just 5, and trade bodies and associations are being set up and the relationships are set up with the main board. James, can you go to the next slide, please? So I know this is quite a busy slide, but I'd like to formally announce the members of the committees. The fleet operators on the committees you can see on the slide. So we've got 5 committees: EV, low carbon and alt fuels, led by Stuart and myself as vice. We've got LCVs, led by Stuart again with Denise being deputy. Future Roads, run by Debbie Floyd and vice by Julie Semerol. Risk compliance and health, we've merged Covid19 into risk and compliance for good reason really, and created a topic around health, which is led by Martin Evans with vice Marie Jarrold, and future mobility steering is led by myself with James Pestle as my vice. In terms of topics, you'll see at the bottom of the pillars there, we will circulate this out to our members after this event, the topics that each of the committees will be looking at. And the committees are being set up for 3 reasons. One is to provide best practice advice to members and the industry. The second pillar is to provide that best practice advice and into our training as the ICFM to make sure that the students going through the training courses get the freshest and best training they can possibly have, set by black belt fleet operators in the marketplace. And the third pillar is to get share of voice thought leadership out to the marketplace around what we believe we need to do as fleet operators and be a true representative body for fleet operators in the marketplace. Okay, James, next slide, please. A lot of our details are now on our website, www.theafp.co.uk. Anyone on this seminar, webinar, it would be great for you guys to just check out the details that we've got on the website. More and more stuff is being put on the website. We're just in the process of loading up an interactive guide for members, which then is effectively a library of questions and answers where you can get the best practice advice online. The fleet directory is being built, which is a directory of fleet service support providers that are affiliated to the AFP. There's latest news, latest thought leadership, details about training and education from the ICFM. So all of that is on our website, as well as we've got our LinkedIn page. So please link into us on LinkedIn and our Twitter account as well. Okay, next slide, please, James. In terms of the overall setup for membership, it's slightly different to what it was under ACFO and the ICFM. So from a fleet operator perspective, you can have membership to either the AFP, which we would prefer, or individual membership just solely to the ICFM. The AFP company membership is $299, which actually includes a membership for an individual to the ICFM automatically as well. The ICFM membership is still available at £60 for an associate member, but of course you don't get the benefits you would do by joining a full AFP. For fleet service support providers, there are 4 packs that you can be a member of. One is bronze at $299, silver at $500, gold at £1,000 per annum, and platinum at £2,000. Bronze pack is $299, is essentially for one membership for one individual within the corporate company to be able to join the AFP. Silver, you can see, is 2, but then you obviously get discounts on training and exhibition space and webinars. And gold, you get 4, and then for platinum, there's unlimited membership for fleet service support providers. Hopefully that is all clear. Next slide, please, James. So that's a brief overview of the committee structures for you guys for the AFP. And we'll be putting more information out in the marketplace about the body, the membership criteria, the committees this afternoon. Thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, Paul. That was a really good insight into the Association of Fleet Professionals, as we call it, AFP. So thank you for that. So Stuart, if I could introduce you now. Stuart's going to be providing us with a general overview of COVID and how it has affected the fleet sector and in fleet sector. Thank you, Stuart.
Thanks, Julie. James, let's move on. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. So let's have a quick look at where the fleet industry currently is. So I think nobody probably would have planned for anything quite like the current pandemic or COVID. Everybody had a disaster recovery plan, but I don't think anybody's was probably sophisticated enough or had enough content to deal with where we're currently at. We saw some unprecedented action, police shutting down auction sites and things that would just normal day-to-day, just stopping immediately. No notice, literally just coming to a full stop. Dealerships effectively being unable to trade, factories across the world stopping, vehicles leaving the gate just coming to a grinding halt. Leasing companies still had assets to manage, but actually the infrastructure around the fleet world was significantly affected, and that affected everybody's ability just to keep everything going. Rental saw a massive reduction, but actually in the LCV side, it's a massive increase, which is good for, I guess, for some areas of business. And road risk suppliers had to digitize its business, and the ability just to go out on the road and spend time with people just diminished overnight. Travel sector was worst hit, obviously public transport as well. And actually, it's the ability just to do everything we would normally do in relation to keeping the vehicle roadworthy just became infinitely more difficult to do. If you just move on, James, thank you. I think this slide is really interesting. So actually, you know, from the feedback we got from fleet operators, if you look at actually how COVID-19 has impacted your business, a relatively small percent had a minimum effect. Most people, I guess, middle of the road, a medium effect on their business. And actually just over about 30% had a major impact on their business. But yet, despite all that, if you look at the fleet operators' ability to survive the pandemic and actually future business, pretty much the majority of people went, actually, we will survive this and we will come out the other side, which is enormously positive. Next slide, please, James. So again, some more interesting statistics on here is actually when fleet operators believe normal will return, in whatever normal will look like. I think most people will have their own view. Is actually less than half think it'll be by the end of Q4 2020, but yet 3/4 will think by the end of Q1 2021. So within effectively a 12-month window, is we will be back to some kind of normal, which I think is again an enormously positive sign that most people think that there is a strategy to come out of this. Again, some actions taken. 23% of businesses have a travel ban. That's quite logical. 42% of fleets plan to extend their current leases or stop ordering. Actually, that makes complete sense too. I think with everything going on, the downsizing of organisations, the furloughing the staff, fleet managers expect their fleet to reduce. 50% of fleet managers expect to slow down on their EV strategy. But I think that's quite strange because I think with the reduction in travel, actually there is more opportunity on the EVs. But I guess every operator, their ability to deliver it will take their own view. This one I think is really interesting for me is 69% of fleet managers are looking to create added value to their company. I think most of them do it anyway, but I think actually given the current situation, the ability to innovate and do things differently, the fleet community are definitely pulling their weight and doing their part, which is great. Again, I think from logical things here, less face-to-face meetings, and supplier base is unlikely to change. I don't think anyone's going to be too brave in radically going out to market, or will be a logical search for those cost savings that are out there. Next slide, please, James. So what have we done already is across the fleet sector? So again, I think there's been a real focus on employee health and welfare, which is great because that actually wasn't necessarily always there before. We've had to engage with communications for vehicles not being used for drivers and employees who've been furloughed. So actually making sure the vehicle welfare where they're stood is probably something that's relatively new for most of us, but I think there's been some really great case studies on that. And employee benefit in kind as well. So those challenges coming through where if actually drivers aren't using their vehicles because they're furloughed, then where does the benefit in kind stand? There's been lots of debates, and then there's been a lot of discussions with government for clarity on where that stands. Not necessarily the right outcome, but again, these are conversations that need to be had, and AFP plays its part in those. And for those who are on the front line is putting those project managed resources and to have a supply chain, albeit a lot of them are furloughed and some of them are closed as well. I think there's been some really great case studies where those supply chain partners who probably on the smaller side have actually done more over and above what was expected of them, and actually some of the largest providers have maybe take a step back because maybe they're more directly impacted by furloughing. But I think there's been some really positive action taken by some in supporting their fleet customers. Next slide, please, James. Again, lots on here. We'll just pick out some sort of high-level ones because I think there's some really positive information in here. So delivery and collection, yes, I think that's kind of an impending problem for us. Is with that backlog, we're going to have vehicles in all the wrong places for all the wrong reasons. Behavioural change is, I think, a really key. So drivers less inclined to travel, and drivers more inclined to make the right choice, which I think really opens up the opportunity for the EV discussion, whereas actually before people were doing a significant amount of miles thought it could never work for them. I think probably now a lot of drivers are in a different place. Commuting, I think, is again, we're conducting this AFP webinar via Zoom, which is great, and it's become everybody's kind of second best friend, along with Teams and other platforms. We're able to do things online that we were never able to do before in huge volumes, with lots of engagement from participants, which is fantastic. The used car market, I think, is going to be one to keep an eye on. And there is going to be a likely increase in low-cost used cars, as actually we've already seen that people are avoiding public transport. So not necessarily great news from a congestion point of view, and maybe even a CO2 point of view, but it's quite logical when actually people are looking to protect their own safety when they're moving about. And until such time as public transport kind of reinstills that confidence, I guess there will be an increase in used cars and old cars on the road. And the human element, requiring safe travel, so changes to fleet policy, having to rewrite policy documents in relation to vehicle occupancy, etc. Next slide, please, James. So, unlocking the UK, how is this going to work going forward? So, vehicle safety is, from the cleanliness of vehicle, having to sanitize vehicles between allocations is a whole new set of challenges that we all know how to valet a car, maybe some better than others, but actually new levels of stringent cleaning and making sure that it's COVID safe for a new employee or a new occupier is a whole new challenge. The whole element of driver safety and health, I think now is great, because it's now becoming a common conversation for people, whereas before it was always about the asset. So thinking about how drivers drive, how far they drive, why they're driving, do they really have to drive, and actually keeping them safe while they're out there. We have seen examples, I know, of some unreasonable and excessive speeds of people being caught because the roads are much quieter. So how do we educate our drivers into, when they are back on the road, because they have to be, that they still remain safe and compliant with the law. Travel patterns and alternative travel, I think, is going to be a massive growth area. So is people really, employees really thinking about why they're having to drive, and is there a better way of doing it first, and actually making the journey by car the last choice rather than the first, and doing it by electronic means if it's possible. Vehicle availability, I think, is only going to get worse. There were restrictions on certain vehicles, certainly on the EV side. This whole scenario is not helping that. But I suppose is with lots of downturn and everything as well, then maybe some vehicle availability will increase. And hopefully there will be a real input on and a real emphasis on the transfer to EVs and alternative fuel vehicles. Cost is obviously a key one. It's unknown at the moment. I think it's probably fair to say costs are going to go up. And I think the key area is on managing the commutes in the grey fleet. If there is this massive increase in second-hand car usage, then actually how is that going to be managed, and how is it going to be visible to the fleet operator, and how they're going to control it. Next slide, please, James. So how do we restart the car park? So vehicle safety, lots of vehicles have been sat idle for a long time, so haven't been doing anywhere near the kind of mileage as they were doing. MOTs that have been extended, SMR garages are on restricted options in relation to the true network being open and available for maintenance. So actually, how do we get our drivers back in their cars, vehicles that are roadworthy, and conditions and the checks that they have to do before they physically drive on the road? Vehicle locations, we have got cars and vans all over the UK in the wrong places for all the wrong reasons. And actually the supply chain being out there to enable the safe movement and the collection and the refurbishment and the reissuing those vehicles, things we used to do every day before, now actually, can we collect it COVID safe? Can we get it to a standard of cleanliness where it's, give the confidence to the new driver that it's been sanitized and it's cleaned, when it's COVID proof. Employee well-being to drive. A lot of people have not been driving. Personally, I've probably done about 500 miles in the last 4 months, whereas I probably did that in a week. So actually, just physically being in the car and having the confidence about doing everything I used to do normally is going to feel very strange to employees. So it's giving them the time and the space where they can actually comfortably get back behind the wheel and go back to doing what they were doing. Downtime management, I think, is what the vehicles have been doing, and actually are we getting the best out of our vehicles? That's going to be a real challenge. Utilisation as well is, cost being what they're going to be, the utilisation debate is probably going to be more prevalent than ever. Probably an unknown one here is, EVs have been sat idle, is whether they've been on charge or whether they haven't, is, what's the impact on those? We're going to have to kind of understand that as we go through it. The renewal program for most of us is going to be a focus of, as a lot of us want to transition to EVs and get that market going again. But actually, is what's the supply chain the market can be able to do to support fleet operators in getting that up and running and back, to some kind of normal. And also, we've got new drivers coming into into a whole new world of unknown elements. So how do we educate them and bring them up to speed in what we expect of them? New slide, please. So I think in the long term, we've learned a lot, especially in actually we can do a lot of the things we used to be able to do, albeit not necessarily face to face, without less travelling. If driving is the most dangerous thing we do, then the less we can do of it, that has to be good. But actually, we still need to run our businesses and keep them going. So I think there's going to be a real focus on less business trips, but making the ones we do have to do more effective. A lot less commute. So the working from home and the home office, I think, has been a revelation for lots of people. There was a real push to, for more on public transport. I think that confidence has taken a severe knock. The time will tell is how quickly that can come back, which is great because that then obviously takes more vehicles off the road, and for those journeys that have to be done to become more effective and more efficient. There will be an increase in employees using personal cars to travel. I don't think we're going to get away with that until the confidence comes back in public transport. Again, there's positive. There will be a high demand for cheap, sub 2K cars, which is probably an untapped market before, but that's actually going to have effect on the vehicle, the slightly newer ones. Is there going to be a demand for that actually, where people just want a cheap runaround to use to get about? Is that ultimately will affect the residual values, and the whole market's going to have to take some time to think about what effect that's going to have. And again, I think there will still be more on alternative fuels. Next slide, please, James. I think it's fair to say, we've learned a lot about COVID. We've learned a lot about ourselves as organisations and as individuals as well. But the risk and the possibility still remains out there of another outbreak. It is quite possible. We've learned a lot, and we shouldn't unlearn all the actions and the good work we've put in place since March. Another outbreak will seriously distress the economy. And then we'll put further stretches on things that we've already seen starting to change. But I think is supply chain as an industry, we understand where we've come from and what we've learned, then actually we will be better placed to take action if or when another outbreak comes. Next slide, please, James. This is part of AFP plays, and we all play as fleet operators. So, what we need from the government in all things, not just for us as a fleet industry, but for COVID in general, is that clear communication flow. I think there have arguably been some successes in some areas that could be significant improvement. Clarity on company cars and LCVs for benefit in kind. Again, this doesn't stop. We just need to keep things going. And I think a real challenge on social distancing is how do we create the space for our employees to go about their work if there are two people teams going out there before and they've had to reduce down to single occupancy in vehicles with a second vehicle following behind. That's not really sustainable going forward. So how do we make vehicle COVID proof where we can have teams working together and delivering all the good work they do when they actually get to their job of work. Continued support for businesses and also employees as individuals. But I think ultimately it's about creating a space where the UK has the resources it needs to deal with this particular pandemic, and also for further instances or other examples of it could be something else in the future, just actually giving us the platform to work from where we can cope with change more quickly and more efficiently. Next slide, please, James. So long-term behaviour changes, I think most businesses have learned that they're probably more resilient and can survive. And I think from a personal perspective, as individuals, I think a lot of us have probably proved more to ourselves than we ever thought possible. If we had chosen to do it this way, we probably wouldn't have done, but it's forced upon us actually as human beings. We are definitely more resilient than we probably give ourselves credit for. Business models have adapted, and that will only change. It probably happened anyway, but I think it focuses the attention through examples like this, where actually we can just do things quicker. Zooms, Teams, and other platforms have been working for most. I think today is a great example of that. More working from home, I think, has changed people's perspective on the work-life balance and makes it more achievable. Shared mobility, I think, is one is going. We have to keep a watching brief on, because I think that unless you have to, there's a real lack of confidence in being able to move around safely. I think that we'll see an increase in grey fleet as people make their own way about in their own personal space. One positive thing for me is the health and well-being. I think there's more focus on individuals' well-being now than there probably ever has been. And also, in fact, out of change comes positive and comes innovation. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to do things differently, where actually we don't have to think about it. We probably don't have time to think about it. And actually, sometimes we just need to do and react and learn as we go. And I think we've seen some examples of that. And again, one for me is the less miles equals less usage equals that real opportunity to embrace the EV or the alternative fuel vehicle. I think everybody before just probably overstated or overthinks how many miles they actually do in their journey planning. And with the change of scenarios we've seen, I think there is a real opportunity to escalate and prioritise that move to EVs. Next slide, please, James. Okay, businesses will adapt. They always do. Dealerships, I think, have taken the opportunity and seen some great examples of how they're been able to become COVID safe and actually, entertain customers and keep the market going, but in a completely different way. I like the idea that you take the dealership to the person, so things become more virtual in nature. Auction sites again is physical footfall. I think there is still a real appetite, and there's a real benefit in that, the market being in the room, but actually until sometimes that can be done safely, then the growth of the virtual market, I think, is going to be a big one. Driver training, again, seeing lots of great companies doing some really innovative changes in how they deliver their online courses and deliver driver training, but in a different way. Rental sector, I think, probably going to be quite an exciting time to be. With the flexibility, being able to move more quickly. Car clubs, I think, for those who can't or don't want to go out and buy a cheap second-hand car, access to quick and easy transport, I think, will be key. There will be the natural and inevitable growth of technology firms as coming up and challenging our convention, which shouldn't necessarily be seen as a downside. And actually, is hoping that the OEMs speed up the transition. As we look at delivering fleet in a different way, is as good a time as any to escalate and prioritise and speed up that transition to alternative fuels. Next slide, please, James. Key steps for fleet managers, managing their fleet, thinking about the early planning of MOTs and working with the partners in the supply chain. Ensuring that roadworthy vehicles do not end up going back on the road, whether knowingly or unknowingly. And like most things, it's planning ahead quickly. We need to be thinking, we need to start plan for that now. A secret is deal with the humans first. The assets largely they manage themselves. Dealing with the employees and the human beings involved, communication is going to be key. Order cycles and how vehicles are used. Start thinking about how the organisation and what you want to achieve and how you want to move forward is be working on that now, especially the contemplation with EVs. If it wasn't fit for your business before, take the time to have a review and look back at it now. It may well be with things being different as they are. and actually take the opportunity of just rescheduling and recontracting the vehicles you have, with reduced mileage. Take the opportunity of just take a sample and just see actually if things have changed significantly from where they are. I suspect they probably have. I think it's fair to say that employees will be testing our policies and procedures. The car allowance but don't want a new car is, there will be the growth, and that's why I'll take the money and run a second-hand vehicle. So strength and robust car allowance and car user policies are going to be key. Grey fleet has always been a challenge. I don't see that stopping anytime soon, and arguably I think the volume coming through it might be increasing significantly. But going back to the slide before, where 69% of fleet managers thinking this is what they want to do anyway, it's looking to add value to your company. Is the fleet manager role quite often, we see can be quite a vulnerable position, and normally one of the first to kind of gets looked at whenever there's downsizing coming on, is where we and you can give examples and demonstrate actually where you can deliver the fleet in a different way and really add value to the company, and just really take action and protect your own well-being. Next slide, please, James. My final thoughts. While we know a bit more now, it's still very much an unknown environment. We don't still yet know when this is going to truly end and when normal will come back, and then actually what normal will look like. But take positives. Safety and health come first. Start thinking about our employees and ourselves as individuals. We are the most important element in this. Businesses will survive mostly. A lot will have to change. A lot have changed significantly in the last 4 months. But it would be ridiculous to say that there won't be any economic challenges, both through this year and into next year, and potentially into 2022 as well, as things settle down and actually, we develop and understand what the new normal looks like. Cost savings will be important as always, as businesses look to create some strength and some resilience. But I think it's more important about actually shaping how we do things in our assets to fit a new world. We've got the opportunity to kind of influence what the future looks like, and so play your part in it and help. Otherwise, don't let it end up in the situation where you're being done to. I think fleet as a real opportunity to shape that conversation. There is still that chance of a second or even a third blip, so plan early and be prepared to change. I think mostly, and the most important one I'll end on, is this is a fantastic time to innovate and add value. Fleet managers do it anyway, and largely we are the unsung heroes, I've always found. So if there's good work out there, be sure to be telling everybody about it. AFP is a great voice. If you want to share your thoughts, actions you're taking, we'll happily put it out there, because this is the time for us to shine. Thank you. Next slide, please, James.
That's great. Thank you for that great overview, Stuart. Very, very, very useful. As we move into our final presentation today, I'd like to introduce you to Paul Brown from Stereocycle. He's going to be sharing the COVID challenges that he's actually faced over the last few months. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. Next slide, please, James. Who am I? Paul Brown. Been within the fleet industry for 35 years. Many names and faces that I see on today's meeting. We've come across and met at many events. What does Stereocycle do? We have two sides to the business. One is regulated waste collections and waste management, from bulk waste at hospitals to the yellow sharps bins that you'll probably see on your GP surgeries, window shelves. And then the other side of it is the secure document destruction. So we go to banks and in industries, and we shred and we take away shredded documents. We either shred on site or we take the documents away and we shred within our waste processing plants. Next slide, please, James. So the first things that we looked at is my past coming from a utilities industry was emergency measures and what we would need to look at on a legal issue. And we engaged with the Department for Transport. As soon as lockdown came in on the 18th of March, we preempted that there would be an issue with supply chain, that there would be an issue with workshops. We were talking and engaging with our suppliers and were engaging with our workshops and workshop management. They were looking at safe ways of working. Things that were going to be closing down were night shifts were going to be stopping in workshops so that they could continue to keep the workshops running with the reduced numbers. Every business was trying to preempt what percentage of staff would they see going down if COVID came into their own respective workforces. So we engaged with the Department for Transport, questioning, as many other transport managers were doing, what was happening with the MOTs, PMIs. Would the PMI 8-week and 12-week schedules still need to exist? Was there going to be an uplift on drivers' hours? And then drivers' hours were uplifted within a few days, but it came in with this wishy-washy guidance that came from the DFT and the DVSA on what that related to. So it said delivering to stores, transport hubs and manufacturing sites. So we questioned, well, where does that come if we're removing regulatory waste? And then there was still those 3 or 4 days or a week gap before they made a decision. Dangerous good licenses. What effect would it have if we had to bring in additional drivers to the industry where we couldn't get them trained up to dangerous goods standards? Was there an exemption where we could cover the lowest levels of the waste that we were carrying? And all that we got, the answers that we kept getting day on day, week on week, was no decision at this time has been made. If anything comes, we'll inform you. So we were trying to get in front of the curve and throw some of these questions to the governing bodies that most transport operators and transport professionals were asking, but the responses coming back weren't. We needed firm decisions, we needed firm guidance, but we didn't seem to get that. Next slide, please, James. So we kept pushing. Legislation's changed. We pushed. Other transport professionals were pushing, and I think on the weight of those requests coming in, it sort of steered the governing bodies which way to look at. So everybody's questioning MOTs and PMIs. So that was the focus that it sort of pushed the government, and then new guidance came out every couple of days. They'd relook at this and change that. So as we see, a week later, we got the extension to MOTs will be granted. An extension for 3 months will be granted from March, and then it's been extended another 3 months. What we've seen now is an issue as we're now coming to the back end of the MOT exemptions are those vehicles that were due an MOT in March had 3 months. Then it took it to June. They've been given another 3 months, which takes it to the end of September. But those vehicles from July onwards have only been given a 3-month extension, and it gets them to needing an MOT by September. So now we've compounded the issue. If we'd continued that, 3 months and another 3 months, we could have had those that started in March needing to be done by September, and then those in July by December. But we've now, under the new guidelines, everything comes to an end at the end of September, and there just isn't now enough MOT slots to accommodate all the vehicles that's out there. So we expect to see a change on that guidance, and we'll probably see those vehicles from July onwards be given another 3 months extension, because it's not being looked into. It's just somebody's put a date in a diary and everything's being structured to finish around that date. I don't think workshops will be back up and running. I know that some suppliers who had their own on-site workshops and some of the leasing companies who had their own on-site workshops are now closing those workshops down. So that puts more pressure on the independent workshop facilities out there to take on extra customer workload and meet all these backlogs. So I think there'll be an issue around that. Next slide, please, James. We then looked for what we could do with, were we classed as key workers? When the word key workers suddenly appeared, and it wasn't just transport staff and taking food to the shops, this key worker sort of appeared as a new word within the dictionary, and it was trying to identify what was a key worker, not just for our staff and whether we could be out there and we could continue, but also for our employees who needed to look at childcare and those kind of provisions that need to be put in. And eventually we got some guidance that came out, and the waste disposal sectors were on there. A very wide area, but it covered what we need. So at least it gave our employees that chance to secure childcare and keep their children in schools where it was required, and that relieved a lot of pressure that we thought was coming with a shortfall in drivers. Next slide, please, James. So we then started to see an issue with, as the roads became like a ghost town, and unprecedented in modern times to see all those vehicles suddenly disappear off the roads. It became that if you was on the road, it was like you were breaking the law. And the police were putting up checks and roadside checks, and our drivers were constantly getting pulled every morning. I think some of the drivers were on first name terms with the officers after a while. So we came up with an idea. We issued them a permit to work. We had that. We had a letter confirming from the NHS that we were working on their behalf. We were key workers. There was one incident in York where one of our vehicles was coming back from one of the hospitals full of COVID waste, and he was stopped by a police check. And while one officer was talking to the driver at the front, the other one decided he was going to open the back of the vehicle and have a look inside, until it was pointed out that the vehicle was full of infected COVID waste. And the driver said, "You've never seen two police officers run and lock themselves in a vehicle as quick." So we found then that one of the things was, as soon as you were stopped by one of the agencies that were stopping, mentioned that you were carrying COVID waste, and your vehicle was usually pulled to the front and sent on its way as quick as possible. Again, we've still had this issue with ADR licensing, and we were in ongoing daily discussions. I was in ongoing daily discussions with the regulatory authorities. I understand we don't want unqualified people driving petrol tankers, and the event and the catastrophic events that could happen if that vehicle was involved in an RTA. But we were trying to point out that we have low risk contaminants that we're collecting. Some of them are in bags. The bags are sealed. They're then inside locked wheelie bins. The wheelie bins are then strapped on a vehicle. So the risk of those items getting into the wider area, should there be an RTA, are very low. And we had a workforce of drivers from our secure document destruction division who, because offices and businesses were closing, there was less paper waste being generated, so there was less need for somebody to go in and collect that paper waste or shred it on site. We had all those drivers that we could move into our medical waste business and use as a pool of drivers that we could rely on and call on if needed. And at the time we were in discussions with the NHS about the initiation of the Nightingale hospitals, what volume that would increase to our fleet. We had vehicles that were parking up on the secure document destruction side. We had drivers. So we had a fleet of vehicles and a trusted team of employees who worked for us that could step in and service those Nightingale hospitals without a problem. The only stumbling block was that they don't have an ADR license, and could we get exemption on the lowest level? It was low level contaminated waste, which is what COVID was. And no decision ever was given. All we ever got was, if that's an issue, then the NHS will raise it, and the government body from the NHS will then call a requirement as the waste bill within the hospitals. Until that happens, then we won't change any of the ADR regulations. So we then had to furlough drivers. We had to mothball vehicles from the other side of the business, which we didn't want to do. If we could have got some guidelines on ADR license, we'd have kept those vehicles as a fallback pool and a fallback pool of drivers. In the end, we mothballed vehicles and we furloughed drivers. Next slide, please, James. So then we got the decision on where we're going with PMIs, and it was pretty much a clear cut that at least we had a working example that if vehicles remain in service, then they should be maintained in line with the service planner. Well, that was a given. If we're using the vehicles, then they need to be serviced and they need to continue. I didn't have an issue with that. It was, what do we do if we freeze and we VOR vehicles, and what's the reinstatement process that we need to to take to get those vehicles back in. Is it needs to have a full service and maintenance, and we got the extension that we could extend the PMIs for double its period to instead of 8 weeks, we could go to 17 weeks, which I was happy with. That if we were bringing a vehicle back in, I was comfortable that if it had been off for a longer period than that, I wasn't comfortable with one of our drivers just jumping in, turning the key over, and expecting the vehicle to be in a safe state. And also just to the long-term preventative maintenance. If these vehicles haven't been turned over and run, are we then going to see suddenly issues with clutches and gearboxes if we're running them cold for such a long period off the road? So we brought in a policy that if it got to the sort of like 16, 17 week, they had a full inspection by one of our fitters who goes round. We'll check the vehicle over, so it's having a thorough standing inspection. So a really in-depth first use. Anything that's identified that they're not happy with, then it goes into workshops. And then we make sure that as soon as we bring it back on the road, the PMI is rebooked for the earliest opportunity, and then the 8-week schedule starts again. Next slide, please, James. PPE always a major issue, was a major issue for everybody. I think the whole of Western Europe was caught out on PPE. I think 95 or 90 or 95% of the world's PPE is manufactured in China. China had gone obviously into lockdown and closed down first. All those companies that made the PPE weren't producing it. So businesses were putting planes on to fly out and collect their own PPE. And the sick was that there were scam merchants out there trying to sell companies PPE that didn't exist. So as much as cream rises to the top, we also know that other things rise to the top as well. And it wasn't good to see that there were scammers out there. But we worked really hard. Our procurement teams were working 24/7 to ensure that all our staff had the right PPE that they needed to wear, dependent on the waste. And we followed lines with exactly what the NHS were doing. If we were just collecting normal hospital waste, then we were wearing the normal required PPE and 24-hour paper face masks. If we were collecting COVID waste, then it was full fitting suits, respirators, full visors, gloves. So we were feeling the same pain as the NHS were, and our procurement teams were working with the NHS procurement teams to ensure that we were all aligned, that if we could source PPE, we were getting it in line for them, and vice versa. We had some of the hospitals were providing some of our sites with PPE just so that we could maintain that clearance of the COVID waste from the actual hospitals. Next slide, please, James. Social distancing, a word that we'd never heard before. Handshakes and elbow bumps, no hugs, no getting close to people. It was just a whole, how do we do this? Two-man teams, what do we do with two-man teams? Government guideline, if you have to have two people in a vehicle, wear face masks, don't look at each other and drive with the window open. Because I don't think anybody knew what social distancing and a 2-meter rule ever looked like. Our guideline is we reduce double manning. Does it need to take place? Was it a luxury? Do we need to change actually what we're collecting to reduce the need for double manning? Is there other equipment that we can issue the driver to make his life easier and make it a single driver tasking? And if we couldn't, then as Stuart's alluded to earlier, we hired a small vehicle and the second man followed the van, and so the truck driver took the truck to the hospital and along went his mate in a small van. It's not something we have a major issue with. It's only on some of the bigger hospitals where if they have to collect waste across all the wards, it could be that one guy starts at the top and another guy starts at the bottom and they work like that. It's not that they're physically collecting, it's a two-man lift sort of thing. So it was just getting the actual second man to the site so he could carry out his duties and things like that. So yeah, we hired a van and we carried it on that way. Next slide, please, James. So additional items that we we saw being a bit of a problem, it was as some of the supplier account managers who knew our business were placed on furlough. This at a time when we were trying to react as the world was changing day by day, hour by hour. Those people that you've built up good working relationships with, who know your business, who know your personality, who know everything about how your organization works and what it does, they were placed on furlough. We saw 3 or 4 account managers being placed on furlough, and then it'd be left with a team manager who was your point of contact, who didn't understand what your nature of the business was and what you were trying to deliver. Call centres and back office support we saw merged. So we saw LCV and LGV teams merged together, but as we know that they're 2 different animals of vehicles, and we had LCV people who probably know vans in and out, but taking calls that were related to LGVs, who didn't know what a 40-foot double-deck trailer with a 3/4 tail lift and charging packs and everything, where the LG team would have known that. So that it just put a bit of pressure, and it put a little bit of some of the transport managers were getting a little bit wound up when they were constantly having to explain themselves twice over to suppliers. Workshops going into reduced hours, it was expected. COVID hit everybody. If 20 or 30% of your workforce was infected with COVID, then you can only offer 20 or 30% less. So we saw the removal of night servicing. That affected the operation because we wanted to use the vehicles as much as we could through the day, and how we got night servicing and reducing that and taking vehicles off. And it just put a little bit of, managers had to start thinking a little bit outside the box. They had to start really looking at routing scheduling and really getting tight on that. The luxury of having we've got a spare vehicle here, or we can take that out for a few hours, that luxury was taken away by the demand. So they really had to dig deep and look at how they did their routing and scheduling. And again, it was if we used to have a collection and delivery, we had to take the vehicles in. Obviously, collection and delivery was a luxury. It was tied into the contract, but it was down to not the actual people not being able to. It was the disinfecting of the vehicle. So some guy comes to collect your vehicle to take it into workshop, but we have to do a full disinfecting of the cab, and then it has to be done again. That's 4 or 5 times that needs to take place. So what we looked at then is, we brought one of the drivers back from furlough into the depot so that they could just come in literally to move vehicles around and take them into workshops. So it wasn't affecting. It didn't need an ADR license to do that. So we had a driver just coming in to offer back office support moving vehicles, leaving our ADR drivers to constantly work on the front line. And then one of the things that really got up my nose personally was all the leasing companies, all the short-term hire companies, all their sales staff have now gone on furlough, and they've got that time to sit at home. And then within a week, I was constantly bombarded with phone calls and emails from people. Do you need any vans? Do you need this? And maybe for the right reasons, they thought that they were doing the right thing, but these were companies that we hadn't dealt with, we didn't deal with. And it just become a real pain that every other phone call, I think, was some leasing company or some short-term hire company trying to sell its wares, to a point that I even vented this on LinkedIn and said that if we need vehicles, we'll contact you. We have a supply chain in place that are aware of our requirements. So please, I appreciate that you're trying to do your job and generate sales and everything, but constantly hounding businesses that are trying to maintain a normal working practice is you've never rung me before, so why you suddenly feel the need to ring me now, sort of thing. But that was my personal gripe over COVID in the first few weeks. Next slide, please, James. What will we see, and I've just put this in just as a bit of a backup for what Stuart said, to be honest, is that since I put the slide together, is what does new world look like, or what does the new future look like for fleets? yes, we have seen an increase in people with company cars wanting to take the card allowance and not return and not replace a company car. That will put pressure on our grey fleet management. We already have a very robust process in for that, but it's going to need to be re-looked at, because I can see that the company cars will drop and grey fleet card allowance will increase. The business as a whole has looked at company cars. We haven't used them for months, and are we going to really use them the same way that we did before? As Stuart said, we're doing in now a month what we probably did in a day, and I think we're going to continue with the virtual meetings and virtual offices. So the business as a whole is actually looking at the type of company cars, and where it was a bit of a status symbol before, now it's just a tool to go to meetings. It's not, people are not spending the amount of time in the car that they used to do. So do they need those big executive type vehicles if they're just going off for the odd 5-minute meeting here, or it's one meeting a month? People have not seen the car, and they're not as precious about the car as they were before COVID. We are looking at EVs. It's more focused as onto the small EV market. If we're going to continue to have little vans that are running around just taking drivers to sites to assist the wagon drivers, then EVs are ideal for that. Small electric EV vehicle that we can have a couple in the depots, and they'll be like I need assistance at this hospital. You can jump in a small vehicle and shoot out, and an EV is ideal for that. So I'm seeing a request coming in, and I can see a push for small EVs coming into the business. It hasn't really affected our supply chain in the med world. We've tenders and replacements of the fleets going on, and that will continue. It certainly has affected the secure document destruction business. We preempt that we'll see probably 20-30% reduction in that business. I think companies that used to have big offices and everything that didn't look at working from home have suddenly within 24 hours had to work from home, and have actually seen no downturn on their productivity or what their staff have delivered. So if they're not in an office and they're not generating paper, we've done it as a paperless sort of office at the moment. Depending on those businesses that continue a percentage working from home, or some businesses that don't survive COVID, we think that will affect our secure documents. So on that, I've literally just, for their renewal of their fleet, 2020 just doesn't exist. We've pulled all the fleet renewals for this year, and we'll restock next April to just see what new normal looks like for that side of the business, and then we'll restructure our fleet accordingly. And we're doing things differently, things that I never thought we'd be doing. And it's like Stuart said, it's a once in a generation type of time to change. We're now doing virtual fleet audits, whereas we used to send people out to the depots and and every 6 months the transport managers were audited, and we went through service files and everything to keep us all license compliant. We still need to do that, but we're now doing it in a virtual means, where WebEx meetings and files being scanned where possible and sent through on PDF documents, so that you can view the paperwork and the service records from the safety of your home office, and you can have that same meeting that you would have had face-to-face again by WebEx. I think that what we need, should the second wave come, and I think we've probably got there, but I think that the biggest stumbling for me wasn't that clear flow of information coming from those relevant departments. DFT and DVSA, I think we were all waiting just for more clear guidance on this is what you can do, and this is how it should be done. So yeah, that's what we saw as challenges, and they're the ones that I preempt what we'll see for the next 3 to 6 months. And I thank you all very much. Unfortunately, I have another meeting at 10:30, so if there's any questions, I'll quickly answer them, or if not, if you'd like to feed them through the chair or the vice chair, I'm more than happy to answer them in email.
Okay, thank you, Paul. That was a really enlightening and informative presentation on this important subject. So thank you again. We're going to start the Q&A session, and as Paul has just said, he's got to leave us, which is a pity, but thank you, Paul. So Stuart and Paul Hollick are actually going to be on our question Q&A panel today. James, I understand we've had a few questions already, which is great news. Can I hand over to you now to share those questions with the panel?
Yeah, thank you, Julie. Appreciate that. Yeah, thank you to all the people that have got in touch with us prior to the webinar with your questions. It's good to hear from you. So the first question to the panel this morning is, how would you advise best practice for those now avoiding public transport and using their own car instead, particularly around grey fleet?
Shall we direct that one to you, Stuart?
Sorry about that. Yeah, so I muted myself during Paul's presentation, and obviously I couldn't unmute myself. I had to get James to do it for me. Yeah, I think it's. I've always suspected and I've always found grey fleet management and the policies associated with really challenging, and I think it's it's taking the opportunity to review and actually be prepared to be flexible in it, because I think in order to keep things moving, there will have to be a degree of flexibility in those policy statements, whether that be on eligibility or compliance with policy in relation to age, mileage, old vehicle type, etc. Because at the end of the day, we're still going to want people to be mobile and doing the good work that they do. But I think it's, I think there's going to be more emphasis on it, because some of them are always stretched at best, and I think worse. And I think there will be lots of opportunities from employees to push the boundaries in relation to what is and isn't acceptable. But I think it's just take the opportunity to review what you have in there, be absolutely be absolutely sure and have clarity on what you want to achieve, and then stick to it and be prepared to say no, because the last thing. We've already described the fact is we've got employees, and we want clear guidance from government and agencies, etc., etc. Employees are going to want the same from us. So I think it's be prepared to stick to your guns, but only after the opportunity to review what you've already got in there.
Thank you.
Great. The second question we have, there's been a lot of confusion about benefit in kind. So what have the HMRC confirmed as the final communication regarding benefit in kind on company cars during furlough, and what would the AFP recommend?
Paul, I think that's over to you.
Yeah, this is my big bugbear. So unlike everybody else across Europe, in the UK, HMRC states that if you make a car available for personal use, it's bickable, so it can be taxed, and it should be taxed. The issue that we've obviously got, and the dispensation that Revenue have put in place just at the start of COVID, was effectively, if you can prove that there hasn't been any personal use on that vehicle, then you can effectively remove it from benefit in kind. But and this is a big issue, the way that the Revenue have effectively said the only way that you can do this is by the employee returning the keys back to the employer. Now, obviously, that's fine in some regards, but actually, if you think about the overall logistics of, and even from my own perspective, if I then started to return my keys back to my employer, I live in Winchester, my office for TMC is up near Manchester, I put them in the post, they could get lost. And also, from a safety perspective, if I then wanted to move the vehicle around my driveway just to make sure it was in a safe position, or rolling the tyres to make sure that there weren't any tyre damage and things like that during the 3-month, 4-month lockdown, I can't do that. So actually the practicalities of what the Revenue are saying, I can understand why they're saying it, because of course you can't use a vehicle, the employee can't use a vehicle at all for private use, but the logistical and practicalities are just huge. So effectively we're kind of at a loggerhead. So one of the outputs, and I've said this to some of the committee members, so the guys in the Future Mobility Steering Committee, one of the first things that the guys are going to look at is how we can get some thought leadership out in the marketplace and start speaking to Revenue about how we can change this legislation over so it's aligned a little bit more favourably with everybody else in Europe.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul, for that. Now, I know Paul Brown mentioned this in his presentation about the situation on outstanding MOTs. What would the AFP confirm is best practice in light of us all having a lot of time to get these completed, or seemingly a lot of time to get these completed now?
I think from my perspective, is literally, you should have been working on it, because that time is going to disappear before you know it. And as fleet operators, we've got volumes of vehicles, but also don't forget there are probably tens or hundreds of thousands of public or privately owned vehicles that are in exactly the same boat, fighting for the same resource. So it's having those grown-up conversations with your supply chains, including your funders and providers. And I don't like the phrase of trying to get to the front of the queue, but if you haven't already started, you're in danger of being way down the line. And again, we referenced it in the slide deck I presented. It's we're going to end up with vehicles that are potentially unroadworthy. We all know that some drivers, we end up in a situation where even pre-COVID, vehicles end up on the road without an MOT or without maintenance. That can still happen, but all you've got is the opportunity for significantly more volume to end up in. And whilst there is an ownership on the individual, the driver, they're going to be looking for support from us as fleet managers and providers of the vehicle to make it easy for them. So it's a massive challenge, and like I said, that time is going to disappear before we know.
I agree. I think you just need to book early, and as there's going to be a rump of effectively all of the outstanding MOTs during the COVID period, plus then the catch-up period, you can expect that a lot of MOT centres are going to be massively booked up. So I think planning now is essential.
Yeah, and I think and don't wait for your dates for the time to go. I think just get in and take a date as soon as you. If it's 3 months earlier than it needs to be, then just get in and get it done, because otherwise you're going to find yourself scratching around for barely available resource.
Yeah. I think we've got time for just one more question now, James.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. Obviously, one of the key questions that we are quite often asked is around daily rental vehicles, particularly because of COVID, and how are staff protected using daily rental vehicles, particularly when they're being delivered and collected.
Stuart, thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's I've seen some great innovation in relation to sanitisation, and the kit is available. I've seen it in use in workshops I ran, even from a portable piece of kit you can use it to effectively almost like a sanitisation bomb, where you can you leave it in the vehicle and it covers the entire vehicle. Is engage with your supplier, as in your rental provider, and understand what their COVID-19 safe processes are, because you're going to need to give the comfort to your driver that when the vehicle turns up, is either you're going to have to let it sit on your drive for 72 hours before you can turn a wheel, or actually that it's been sanitized to within to a standard, and the drivers turn up with gloves and face mask and whatever it is I suspect there will be a variance between providers and actually between what they say and what happens in reality, because it is a real challenge. You're asking people to do things that they never have to done before, and a lot of them don't understand why either. Is a delivery driver just wants to get their car dropped off or picked up and then get back and move on to the next one. If you're doing 2 or 3 of those a day, the opportunity to spread the virus is enormous. So is understand, what the KPIs and the SLAs are with your providers, specifically relating to COVID-19, and draw comfort from what you get in return and audit it.
Yeah. Okay.
I think as well, from my perspective, as well, talking to a lot of the rental companies, it's now taking over 40-45 minutes to do a deep clean on these vehicles to make sure that they are effectively sterile and clean environments. Yeah. So the rental industry have made big progress to make sure that they've still got a viable solution for all of us as fleet operators out there. So again, a bit like Stuart said, just work with your provider, make sure that you feel comfortable about the hygiene element of what they're providing. and then keep on using them. You know, it's still an industry that needs to be supported in the right way.
Definitely.
Brilliant. I'd like to thank everyone for their questions, and apologies for the questions we didn't have chance to answer. We will be including the webinar recording, as I said at the outset, on the AFP website for future member reference, and we'll include the questions and answers for you as well. I'd like to take this opportunity of thanking Paul Brown again in his absence for his support today, and just advising that we will be holding another webinar in September on the topic of adding value to your business, and that's a subject that came up in a couple of the presentations today. But let me close by saying thank you once again for your time, really appreciate it, and I hope you found some value from this session. And have a good day and stay safe. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Bye-bye.
Thanks.